Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Phenomenon, a Paranormal Podcast. I'm here again with my co-host, Anthony.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing today?
And today we are going to be talking about one specific topic, or urban legend, if you want to call it, that's fairly local to us, where we live.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting if you guys don't know this already. What we're going to be talking about today is a type of Bigfoot or Sasquatch kind of creature, but with a very specific twist. Most people know that Bigfoots are found, or supposedly found in like the Northwest, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, that kind of thing. But what people may not realize is that Southern California has its own rich history with Bigfoot-like creatures.
Right. It's a cryptid. I guess that's what we would call it.
Yeah.
But all the features are very much the same.
Yeah.
Accounts can be different in height here and there, but
maybe different small distortions in the color of the hair,
right? That
kind of thing. But overall, the general description of these creatures is very similar in nature.
Do you want to tell him what he's called?
This particular creature we're talking about today is called the Yucca Man. This is also, we'll talk about it, but there's a lot of other names that have been associated with this creature. But the one most people might know him as is the Yucca Man.
Right. I mean, if you're a Bigfoot enthusiast, you could be very, very familiar with this story.
Yeah.
But if you're a layperson or someone who has maybe not studied all of the Bigfoot lore that is out there,
yeah,
this might be new to you, so we're glad to share it with you today. And there's a lot of history with the Yucca Man.
We can start, I think, with probably the most well-known story.
Right.
One of the most famous. It kind of has become the central story of this creature. It took place at the 29 Palms Desert Training Base here in Southern California. Essentially, there was a young Marine on guard duty in some far-off corner of the base. He heard an awful sound in the dark, something like a growl. Then he heard some breathing coming from one side of his little guard booth that he was sitting in. And suddenly, something was circling him. He stepped out into the dark. He drew his sidearm. He stood there and witnessed something that stood about 8 feet tall, with an unbearable stench from its very hairy body, and saw that it had glowing eyes that looked like red coals. And the reports kind of go back and forth here. Some people say one thing and something another. But the Marine was either knocked unconscious or left alone because he was so scared by this beast, and was found hours later by the next shift from another guard.
Well, tell them what happened to the weapon
during
that time.
Getting to is when the creature came towards this man, this soldier, he took his rifle, his requisite rifle for guard duty, and bent it, destroyed it, but put it in half, and threw it to the ground and at the guard's feet. And yet he left the guard alone. The guard was terrified, of course, but the creature just disappeared after the encounter.
And that's something that was interesting to us, and there's a lot more we'll have to say about it, but this terrifying creature had this guardman all on his own, alone, in a very remote area of the base. There would be no reason that he couldn't have destroyed him if he wanted to.
Yeah.
So, I guess, we'll have to talk a little bit about what we think the reason for that is.
Yeah.
As we get further into his history.
There's a lot that goes into this creature's history and our theories about it, but we'll get all into that as we go on here.
Yeah, so that is, like Anthony said, the most notorious sighting.
Yeah.
I would say, in modern times.
Right.
There's a whole lot of, backstory that goes back to the Native Americans,
Right.
of their sightings of him.
Right.
So we'll get to that, but we're going to move a little bit forward. That base in particular, during the 70s had expanded, its prior World War II encampment there. And of course, all during those years, there were regular reports of new recruits being terrorized by the Yucca Man.
Right.
But also pranks they would pull on each other, inspired by the tales of the Yucca Man.
Yeah, this guy became so popular that it became like a urban legend. Like we said, people would use it to scare their friends, to scare their comrades, whatever you want to call it. It was the monster, the boogeyman in the night kind of thing.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and you can't blame him. I mean,
no, it was
great fodder for a prank, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, the other sightings during that time, right around that same area, you'd get campers and hikers going through Joshua Tree National Park.
Yeah.
And they would often have their, tents pitched and, be camping out there. And then they, would see the next day their tents had been, supposedly torn open by a stinking monstrosity. And, they even submitted certain evidence, I guess.
Blurry images. This is a typical thing for a lot of Sasquatch sightings is most of the footage or photos that are captured are very blurry or grainy.
Right.
What I thought was interesting was the way that campers would describe these creatures as spectral.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That's something that will tie into our theory later, but keep that in mind that they were described as spectral.
Right.
They were still physical, but campers had a very specific word for their sightings. So,
and they also took, pictures of tracks, supposedly, right?
Yeah, large footprints
right.
in the ground and around their campsite.
Which, of course, ultimately brought out the cryptozoologists and famous Bigfoot researchers that would come out and, try and evaluate all this stuff, because, of course, the holy grail in cryptozoology is finding an actual Bigfoot.
Right. I mean, they even compared this sighting to the Patterson-Gimlin film of 1967, because many hikers saw this creature bounding over boulders, much like the film depicts the Bigfoot, the infamous Bigfoot,
right,
in the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Well, we actually have a photograph that goes along with an article that we can put a link in here.
We're going to submit all our links from our research down below, so you yourselves can check it out for yourselves, come to your own conclusions.
Right.
This is definitely an open discussion kind of podcast, so if you read through the same things that we do and have your own opinions on it, feel free to let us know.
Right.
Submit messages on our social media or whatever, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about Yucca Man.
And if you've had your own sighting of the Yucca Man, or even in a different part of the country, if you've had your own Bigfoot sighting, we'd love to hear your story.
That would be a great story. I'm always fascinated by those kind of stories. So
exactly. So, then we're going to talk about the Native American connection after we get through this modern stuff. But, these sightings go forward. They go into actually another area that's not considered the desert area up here, but not too far away, in the Inland Empire in Fontana.
Yes, this was really interesting. There was a case of a creature that was known as the Speedway Monster of Fontana. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, this was in the early 70s, also, same timeline.
Yeah.
But the old Fontana Speedway was, north of Foothill Boulevard, and it was run by Mickey Thompson, who, if you were ever a racing fan during those days, Mickey Thompson was a huge name. I mean, he ran racing, and unfortunately met his own demise, being murdered, he and his wife, in the driveway of their home by a competitor, a rival.
Right.
But back during those days when he ran this one in Fontana, there were sightings, sometimes even during the races, of a hairy, very big, quote-unquote monster who would come up from the foothills and make an appearance. There were several sightings during the 70s.
They would see it coming from the San Bernardino Mountains, specifically.
Exactly, which is the same territory that leads to the Yucca Man.
And what was interesting about that was that they said the sightings occurred after very fatal car crashes on the Speedway. And once there would be a series of gruesome fatal crashes in the year 1972. Even before that, too. And whenever that happened, the Speedway monster would appear, and they would describe him as this wild man who would cross the rural land at the dragway's edge, and during car races produced a horrific noise.
Right.
That, I mean, you imagine how loud car races are. If people are hearing this creature's noises, you got to imagine it's a pretty powerful,
absolutely,
cryptid.
Right.
You know.
Well, see, that kind of will also like be something that we're going to address, which is, you know, people are usually in fear of something they don't understand, and of course, if you see this huge hairy beast, you know, our instincts is, you know, wow, we're going to run the other way, we're going to be afraid. But I guess the ultimate question is he something to fear or something to listen to? Is he trying to warn us of something? You know, when people see them, what is connected to it?
Right.
So, you know, this also was something that was seen in the Antelope Valley suburbs. I think they referred to him, I mean, he's gone by so many names, but the Mojave Sasquatch.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he was seen in neighborhoods, right? Or not far from...
They actually called it the Mojave Sasquatch epidemic of the 60s and 70s. There were so many sightings of this creature in Antelope Valley, in the Mojave area.
Right.
In Lancaster and Palmdale.
Right. 9 Mile Canyon.
And pushed into the desert area, essentially. Near, and this will be another thing we talk about later, but it was pushing towards Edwards Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And Lockheed's notorious Skunk Works facility, which in Southern California, those two locations are very notorious. But yeah, the Antelope Valley Daily Ledger and Gazette even described the creature from eyewitness reports in 1973. And the headline read, "Bigfoot surfaces again in Palmdale, 9 Mile Canyon." So, again, the very similar MO.
Wasn't there a little boy that had a run-in with him?
Oh, yeah, there was definitely, this is one of the more famous cases in that area. A small boy was sent to tell his father by his mother to let him know that supper was ready at the time.
Right.
And the boy was found hours later crying near the family's corral, and when they tried asking him what happened, all he could say was that a big furry man would not let him pass by.
Oh,
which, if you're a child and a big furry man is telling you can't go to get your father for supper,
you don't go.
No, you hightail it out of there. So
poor kid.
I mean, I feel so bad for him. I mean, here's the thing: we're always trying to. Our goal is to educate people on not to be afraid of the unknown. Right. But you can't really compute that to a child. When you're a child and something like that occurs, you're of course going to be scared. You're going to be terrified. Exactly. Most adults who don't know about this stuff are going to be terrified. Right. But this poor kid, man, all he was doing was going to go get his dad. And, you know, when you see something like that, you know, of course you're going to go hide where no one can find you. I want to make a special note. If you were the little boy that saw the big hairy man, feel free to message us. So we want to know what you saw. What you saw, what your encounter was like. What has it done to shape your life at all? Is it something you've tried to forget about? Or what have you? Just talk to us, because, I mean, man, I can't imagine. I can't either, but... I think that one incident sparked even more of a frenzy in Lancaster, because then you had, you know, obviously with something like that happening and multitude of sightings going on during those years, it really sparked a lot of, you know, Bigfoot hunters and researchers. And there's even another case of a woman who was living in the area where at night she saw the creature running around outside her home. And then started hearing scratching noises at the door, like it was trying to either get her attention or even get in. We don't know. Right. You can't speculate on the motivation, but the creature was running around her house in the same area where this little boy saw the creature. So naturally... Was that the babysitter, or was that another woman? I think it was... I think the reports just say another woman. Okay, but, either way, it's easy to see why this area was kind of descended upon by the Bigfoot and cryptid community. Well, yeah, I mean, and that sparked vigilante groups trying to go out and capture them himself, which, of course,
this is like something out of a horror movie that you see, but two of them almost shot each other, right?
Yeah, in 1973, in May of 1973, it's ironic it was May.
Wow.
But there was a search party in the area and attempting to follow up on several Bigfoot reports, and they were forced to take cover when another party of the same sort panicked and started shooting when they heard that they were being approached by a large creature, quote unquote.
Wow.
But, thankfully at the time no one was injured. But can you imagine, you think you're out there to stop a monster and you guys almost gun each other down because you guys are responding to fear.
Oh, exactly.
You're in the midst of a hysteria moment and all these sightings of this creature, and because it's unknown, your instinct is to want to protect your family, to protect your kids or whatever, and you go out there thinking you're going to hunt this thing down, you're going to be the hero who stops this creature from terrorizing your town. And then you guys fire on each other and almost lose your lives in the process. This is what fear does.
Of course it does. And it's like anything that I think we come across in our existence as humans, is, we fear what we don't understand. We're the first ones to say that we want to protect our home and our family.
Yeah.
But then again, we go into wildlife areas or whatnot and encroach on their surroundings.
Yeah.
And we want to either say that surroundings are now ours, or we just want to go for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're protecting their home and family. So
that ties into our theory later, too. But
yeah.
There's
more to talk about, though.
Yeah, before we can get into that, there's a lot to talk about.
All right. So, at this point, we've got more sightings, again, of hairy, red-eyed, what now in some areas is being called the Sierra Highway Devil.
And that's in recent years.
That's more recently, where people, terrified drivers along Highway 14 near the Pear Blossom Highway, always at night, see this creature running across the road.
Yeah.
Okay,
but
so
interesting, running across the road, but then disappearing.
Exactly.
And it's always the same pattern.
Always.
Always.
It reminds me of a residual haunting, to be honest.
That's what's interesting about it, but we'll get into that a whole nother time, or later.
Well, now this next little grouping here is something that, gosh, it just goes off in so many different directions. But
yeah.
A big area of sightings for the Yucca Man happened at Edwards Air Force Base. And I mean, I'm recalling all of these things that you and I have talked about endlessly since researching this. But did we talk? We haven't gotten to the cement monster part of this story yet.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing that, and I wish I could recall the Bigfoot hunter's name, but there was a really well-known researcher in the Bigfoot area who was called out to the area because two men, I believe, were they part of the Edwards Air Force Base? They were soldiers?
They were Marines, yes.
Marines.
Yes.
They were there. They were coming home, I think, from a trip of some sort, a weekend trip.
Right.
Back to the base. And I think this was in the 80s.
Right. It was the 80s.
And at the time, they were driving along the highway when one of these creature sightings happened. The Sierra monster, the highway monster.
The Highway Devil.
I mean, this is all the Yucca Man, but there's been a lot of different names for this creature.
Well, this was near an old cement plant.
Right.
Right? And so they, being Marines, were, they weren't going to just go home. They were going to get out and try to look for them.
Yeah, I mean, they're Marines. They're trained for certain things. They have their weapons, and they went out looking for it.
Right.
They wanted to know what it was that almost ran them off the road.
They couldn't find him.
No.
Probably a good thing that they didn't.
Right, yeah.
But that's when he got the name, the Cement Monster.
Yeah.
Right?
He was the infamous cement monster
that could never be found.
Yeah, and disappeared, kind of like a specter, right?
Well, yeah, there you go. Spectral sightings. So getting back to Edwards Air Force Base, do you want to tackle this?
I can try. Edwards Air Force Base, wow. Edwards Air Force Base is probably the strangest tale of all, according to a lot of people who have researched this area. It's a desert base adjoining the massive Rogers Dry Lake with miles of smooth desert runways, and is famed for its right stuff type test pilots.
Okay. And
landings of NASA space shuttles, actually.
Yeah, this is where the Mojave Desert really gets interesting.
Yeah, there's a significant subterranean infrastructure at Edwards Air Force Base, which I'm not sure if a lot of people know about this. But if you know the area at all, if you know the stories of Edwards Air Force Base, there's a lot of basically underground tunnels.
Yeah.
A lot of systems that...
It's a whole world under there. And it's, to me, it reminds me a lot of the unknown Area 51, where, we all know it's there.
Yeah.
But do we know what all it entails? I mean, there's probably a whole world underneath Area 51 because that's how the government keeps things from everybody else, right?
Don't get me started on Area 51. I know. Area 51 will be another episode, trust me, because I have so many theories.
It's going to be a whole series, I can imagine.
Let me just say, I don't think anyone really knows the true location of Area 51. I'll just put that out there. There's a whole lot that goes with that theory.
I think it's more like Area 52, and everyone's going to Area 51. But anyway,
53, 54. I mean,
for all we know, Edwards Air Force Base is Area 51. Right? From the sound of this.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's kind of par for the course here.
Right.
They have a lot of personnel and technology that would require them to keep secret aircrafts a secret.
Right.
They have a lot of military secret projects that go on in this base. Test pilots are notorious here, so it makes you wonder...
What are they testing?
What are they testing, exactly? Right. So, security cameras are always pointed at the sensitive areas because they're trying to keep all their technology secret, of course.
Of course.
It's a government area. So, according to persistent stories from Edwards itself, those cameras repeatedly captured images of the desert Sasquatch moving through the tunnels at night. This is a military government facility saying that they caught footage of this creature moving through their tunnels, their secret tunnels that are supposed to be guarded,
right,
and are used for secret military projects. And yet, the Sasquatch...
You can move freely through them.
Yeah. Never captured.
Maybe it'll be like the recent UFO footage that a particular group put out months ahead of the government, and the government is now saying, that's actual footage. Or maybe one day it'll be a Bigfoot thing where they've had all this footage and proof for how many years, and finally they're going, Patterson-Gimlin film.
Right, they're going to be like, you guys didn't know this already?
It's valid,
Yeah, of course Bigfoot's real.
One day.
I thought everyone knew that.
I know,
right? Apparently, entire families of the hairy monsters traveled the base's buildings and corridors, appearing and disappearing at will. So not just one desert Sasquatch.
No, but like a family.
Entire family or group of people of these creatures have stopped.
Right. And
gone through the tunnels.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely an interesting thing that we're not just talking about just one isolated, the Yucca Man. We're still, we're going to keep calling him the Yucca Man because he's got a million names, but not one Yucca Man just running through, but on occasion, two together, right?
Two, three, entire families, they say.
Entire families of hairy monsters.
They say that, according to the base's police force, were chasing these creatures around the tunnels and the buildings of the base.
Right.
And they would disappear, calling them phantasms.
Phantasms.
That's what they described them as, ironically.
An interesting phrase. I guess, too, when you really think about it, though, the Phantasm film was big during those days. Yeah. So I guess that would be a good word to grasp at. But
I have an actual report here.
Okay.
That I'll mention. It's one of many reports, but I want to make note of this real quick.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this notorious figure in a whole nother episode one day.
Okay.
But at Edwards Air Force Base, a Bigfoot researcher who had gone there collected a report from a base policeman who happened to be patrolling the old sled track section of the base. This area of the base was notorious for the Thelemite wizard and jet propulsion laboratory founder Jack Parsons himself.
Such an interesting character, Mr. Parsons.
He's tied to a lot of different things that we're looking into and interested in. He is quite the character. We'll get into his whole thing in another episode. I could go on and on about him.
Right.
But let's just say he's tied not only to the infamous Aleister Crowley and was a Thelemite wizard, but he was also working for the government on the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories.
He founded that. He
founded it.
I just want to throw in there that he died in the Mojave Desert
mysteriously
under mysterious circumstances. But hey, we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah,
but this tunnel that they got this report of was one of the tunnels that he used to test out his rockets for the government.
And it was also where Nazi V2s had been tested on as a specialty built railroad.
Underground
railroad, ironically. It was,
literally.
Yeah, it was literal underground railroad.
Okay, so read the report. I'll be quiet. Okay, go ahead.
Heading back to the main base, and this is the report talking, not me, but heading back to the main base, I noticed maybe 200 to 300 yards to my left these large blue eyes. I do a lot of night hunting, and it was strange. They were larger than anything I'd ever seen before. The blue eyes had to be about 4 inches apart and 7 feet off the ground. I stopped the truck and sat there watching them. It was too dark to see any body shape to the thing. The blue glows proceeded toward my truck at a right angle for about 100 yards and then just stopped.
As if they disappeared.
Yeah, and again, another claim with this cryptid is an overpowering stench that filled the desert air after sighting it. Sergeant House saw the huge blue eyes again, now just 50 yards away.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it went from 100 yards to 50 yards in the blink of an eye.
But then he didn't see him for a brief time, right?
Yeah, he disappeared and then suddenly just appeared again, 50 yards away.
All right.
The movement of the eyes was extremely fast. Another thing that bothered me was that they didn't bob up and down. It was like two lights on a wire moving from one point to another. A radio call to the driver gave him a very good reason to leave the area, never to see him again.
Wow.
So,
that's quite the report. I mean, we have said that, we'll talk about, our theories on stuff like this, but, it is very interesting that, you're seeing something coming at you, then they just seem to go away. Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden they're there again. So this is much like the reports of him crossing the Pear Blossom Highway.
Yeah.
Even from the very first reports, of people seeing them and then just suddenly he's just gone.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that if you're a Bigfoot enthusiast, this is all sounding very familiar to you at this point.
Well, what's interesting about this is very similar to some bases in England, actually. After witnessing UFOs, soldiers were made fun of so badly that they stopped talking about their sightings, right?
Right.
Well, the same thing happened here. After this driver's report of the blue eyes, he was, kind of made fun of a lot by the people on the base. And because of that, no other people who saw this creature made an official report.
Oh, yeah, no wonder.
Until 2009.
Wow.
They didn't end. They just weren't reported until 2009. And in 2009, Edwards Air Force Base officially acknowledged the incidents with blue eyes. That's what they called the Yucca Man at the time, blue eyes.
And it's also interesting that they saw him with blue eyes, but every other report has seen him with red eyes, which to me is, I'm not sure what that's about, but it's just an interesting distinction.
Well, especially considering that Edwards Air Force Base didn't just see the one. See, all the other reports up until now, I had seen one singular creature.
Right, which a lot of sightings for a Bigfoot or whatever you want to call him, Yeti, it's always one alone.
And had red eyes. But then in Edwards Air Force Base, it has blue eyes, and they see multiple, families.
Yeah.
Of this creature. I mean, to describe it as a family, you're imagining at least 3 or 4 people, these creatures.
Right.
Moving through the tunnels and not able to be caught by the police.
Right.
That's saying something. And for Edwards to officially state that this happened, that people made these reports.
I think they almost didn't have a choice after they had a big reunion.
Yeah.
Which is, the next thing to talk about here. And that was also in 2009.
It was an article was released called Inside Edwards. It was a newsletter that went out to the base personnel.
Right.
And it was Blue Eyes was discussed by the people at the reunion of the 6,510th Air Police Squadron, where officers who worked on the base from 1973 to 1979 talked about blue eyes. They were also known as the 6,510th Desert Rats.
Right,
that was their official name.
The squadron nickname, right? Okay.
And they traded memories of their experience with this creature, seeing it on patrol and deeming it blue eyes. the local version of a Yeti near South Base, or they also, ironically, this is interesting, they called it Marvin of the Mojave. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, Marvin is kind of a nickname a lot of people give to aliens.
Right.
Because of the infamous cartoon Marvin the Martian.
Exactly, and then
so
they also called him a ghost in their terminology, that he could be heard but not seen at that point, and left size 10 sneaker imprints in the sand.
Sneaker imprints is interesting too.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. Yeah,
where it went from bare footprints to sneakers all of a sudden.
Right. Now they also had now retired guards who, during this whole time when everyone's reminiscing, they recalled observing unexplainable objects in the skies and seeing disappearing tail lights on the dry lake beds.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because I mean
the motto for the Desert Rats, shared with the Air Force Test Center for which it served, was ad inexplorata, or toward the unknown, which was interesting.
That is really interesting to me too.
Because, I mean, it's what we like to call a synchronicity, I think.
Yeah.
We like that term. We discovered it through Hellier, of course, but synchronicity was something, developed by Carl Jung, right?
Right, Carl Jung.
Jung? However you want to pronounce it.
Yes.
But he kind of came up with this, where things that seem like a coincidence are a little more than a coincidence.
Right.
These desert rats, these soldiers, were just soldiers. They weren't there to look for aliens or creatures or anything like that.
Right.
But their motto was towards the unknown, and boy, did they find the unknown. Not trying to, but they found something that defies
whole lot
logic.
Of the unknown, right?
So.
This is, there's so much history to this that I don't think we could possibly put it all in this one episode. I mean,
no, we might have to do a whole another part 2 to this one day.
Yeah, we just might have to, because there were sightings as far back as the first natives on this part of land in the Mojave Desert. There were Spanish missionaries who had their experiences with them, and then we had already planned on doing a separate segment on yet another version of this cryptid in the San Diego area called the Borrego Sandman. So there's so much ground to cover, but the one thing that I think we really wanted to touch on is this whole idea of a Bigfoot cryptids, or that whole family of cryptids being spectral, because this is something that Bigfoot researchers talk about all the time. It's been the thought of why is this particular being so elusive? Why is it so hard? Look at our, not everybody's, but there's a big mentality in our country of hunting, and people who are going out looking for Bigfoot. I mean, these are diehard people who have dedicated their lives to go and finding an actual Bigfoot, or actual, the hardest evidence you can find, whether it be photographic, video. I mean, sure, there's been plenty of tracks, but tracks can be faked, and what is it that they could capture of this? And it's impossible. It's elusive. So why is that? Right. And why did people give him the term of spectral?
Well, again, we're going to have to do a part 2 to this, because there's a lot to cover. But before we go today, I definitely want to cover our theory.
Right.
Which ties into the spectral thing. And again, there's a couple of theories that we have. And our theories are always growing. So feel free to discuss this with us, and maybe we can develop another theory.
Right.
However, there's a couple theories. Which one do you want to do first?
Well,
what's your favorite theory? I guess I'll ask you. What's your
my favorite theory? Wow,
that's we've talked about.
Well, I mean, to me, one of the things that it's hard to separate them, because honestly, I think the theories tie together. Yeah. Okay, but if I can just talk more about the whole spectral issue. Yeah. I mean, there is a popular thought, especially in recent years, about Bigfoot and his extended cousins, I guess, being interdimensional beings.
Right.
You know, the fact that they seem to disappear at will, even reading about the Air Force tunnels at Edwards, you know, you see the eyes and they're gone. Right. And then they come back and they're gone. There have been witnesses who have claimed that they've, you know, seen on their Bigfoot expeditions, seen them literally disappear in front of their eyes, and then maybe reappear further down the trail, as if jumping in and out of a wormhole almost.
Blink of an eye.
Yeah, blink of an eye.
Yeah.
They're there, then they're gone. And that would really lend to the weight of the fact that, you know, they have not been caught. There's never been someone who has shot. Well, there have been stories in our part 2 we'll talk about.
It's kind of like UFOs. A lot of people claim they have alien bodies.
Right.
And then you see the footage and it's very clearly, you know, a
Doctored
dominant or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but you know, I don't think anyone's really caught truly a Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yucca Man.
Right.
Because of what Christina was talking about, I think, you know, there is a good argument for interdimensional beings. And the reason why I like this theory lends into the other part of the theory, which is a lot of the sightings of these creatures tend to be around areas where humanity is kind of encroaching on natural territory.
Exactly.
It seems almost to me like it could be like a defense system. They're there to warn people off from going into certain areas. One thing that Christina and I like to talk about a lot is we believe that there are areas in this world that are what we call thinner, where the barrier of our world, our reality, our portion of, you know, life itself is so thin that beings can move in and out from our world into, you know, other worlds. If you believe in the concept of like the multiverse, like there are multiple universes, and multiple,
a parallel universe to ours, or, you know, we've talked about the quantum consciousness in our first episode. You know, I don't think we know anything about life beyond ourselves because there's just so much to know. I think, you know, the possibilities really can be infinite. So the thought of an interdimensional being that can, you know, go from our reality to somewhere else, to me is not so far-fetched, considering what has, you know, been coming out in recent years with, you know, a star being swallowed into, you know, a hole, and where does that go? I mean,
for many years, everyone has believed that, scientists even have believed that black holes destroy whatever comes into its path.
Right.
More recently, though, I'm reading a lot of articles that say scientists have discovered that matter isn't being destroyed, it's rather being transported.
Right.
As if the black holes are not destroying these things, but they're acting as wormholes almost. Like they're from one point in our universe to another point somewhere else entirely.
Exactly.
Where that goes, I don't know. But these things, as well as tests with dark matter, and scientists have been able in China to transport a single particle atom or whatever from Earth to a space station up in the space, you know?
Yeah.
This is all science fiction stuff, but yet it's becoming reality.
It's happening, or at least our knowledge of it happening is now becoming more readily available. I mean, here's the thing, and we've said this a million times, you know, back in the days, you know, during the days of the Roswell crash, quote unquote, you know, the earliest sightings of the Mothman, and that's another thing that, you know, we feel, you know, could tie a lot of things together. But, you know, the earliest UFO sightings, we didn't have the internet like we do now. We didn't have, you know, back then the ability to squash information was at the government's fingertips. And, you know, it was very easy to control because, you know what, people are going to, you know, Google everything now. I mean, you can't, you know, we have now Tom DeLonge's group who is, you know, released those videos and has some very reputable people that used to work for the government working for him. And now that information is out there and the government is forced to come out later on and say, well, yes, that's actually accurate. You know, they can't deny what, you know, these other people are putting out because it's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
How are you going to deny that? Which, you know, this is the same in this case, like we read about Edwards, and then they come out years later and they, because of all these other stories in this article, and they say, oh, well, those accounts actually were reported.
I know.
You know, so the further along we get in technology, the harder it is for this information to just stay. That's why, you know, NASA, you know, all the stuff that they capture out there in space now is public domain.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have live feeds going on their site every day.
I mean, if you think about, I mean, a lot of people know this story if you're a big buff of, like, classic UFO stories, but, you know, back in the day during World War II, there was the infamous Battle of Los Angeles, Battle of LA.
Oh, yes.
You know, and everyone heard these explosions. Everyone heard, like, a war zone being on the Los Angeles coastline, and saw, like, explosions in the air and what looked like some sort of ship, right?
Right.
But then, because this was an age where the internet didn't exist, the government was able to say, well, this was just a testing thing. It wasn't actually a thing. But during wartime, what kind of sense does it make to scare an entire city by raising the war alarm?
Right.
Like the city itself heard the entire alarm system going off that told everyone, hey, the enemy's here.
Right.
And yet, you're going to deny it and say, no, it was just a test?
Yeah.
What kind of sense does that make?
Well,
but they were able to cover it up because, you know, there was just the locals there, and who's going to, you know...
What are they going to do? Who are they going to email?
Yeah,
Nobody.
They're going to believe the government because, you know, the government's always right? Right,
well, they know what they're told.
Not anymore, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Now everyone with a phone and a camera can point at the sky and say, oh, well, there's aliens right there.
Of course, because, you know, we see it happen all the time. We have our own reports out here where we live because guess what, folks? We live in the Mojave Desert area, and the Mojave Desert is notorious for so many things, but
UFOs,
above all,
cryptids. I mean, it's all here.
UFO sightings are rampant, and well, there's probably a good reason for it. We are not far from Area 51 and from Edwards Air Force Base and Joshua Tree.
Even natural stuff like, you know, the fault lines here and you know, the desert itself. There's a lot of cave systems here. There's a lot of theories about areas with a lot of mountains or desert and cave areas.
Right. Well, if any of our fans are watchers of Hellier, then you know just how important all these sightings become the closer you're near old mines, which we have about 1 billion of in the Mojave.
And that actually leads into another theory of mine, which is just it's a small theory, and I could be wrong. But something that, you know, cases like Hellier or the Mothman prophecies or anything like those kind of cases have said before, when you see these cases, the Mothman didn't just have the creature sighting, it had UFO sightings, it had Men in Black sightings, you know, ghost stories. A lot of activity ramped up at the time.
Right.
Same thing happened in Hellier, where everyone in Hellier seemed to have a story of something different. A UFO, a ghost, a Bigfoot, a goblins, stuff like that. But what I'm saying here is the Mojave has very similar things. A lot of different stories being told, a lot of different sightings, including the Yucca Man.
The Yucca Man is one. Yeah, one of many.
One thing that a lot of researchers and theorists say is they think these events of a combination of paranormal and UFO sightings and even cryptids could all be a distress signal.
Right.
From some unknown persons. They don't want to go on record as saying it's aliens, but, you know, it's for the classic line from Ancient Aliens, it's aliens, right?
Yeah, I don't want to say it was aliens.
But it's aliens.
But it's aliens, yeah.
But, you know, a lot of people said in the Mothman case that the being that was identified as Injured Cold was some sort of person from not from our world with a bunch of other people not from our world who were seeking shelter here, and had let out a distress beacon that manifested as the Mothman sighting and the UFO sightings, and that's why the Men in Black were here.
Right.
A lot of and you can see a lot of this history being explored in Hellier, but you know they thought that they were trying to contact the Third Order for protection and stuff like that.
Right.
And they never came. But
that's
could that be happening here?
Yeah,
you know?
We didn't even mention, but during all of this Yucca Man, you know, uproar in the 70s, the FBI and the CIA got involved.
Yep.
So, back in those days, those are our men in black who are coming out to investigate. I even read a really interesting account of a UFO sighting, and I'm going to find it so we can talk about it another time. But it, was very interesting report, first-hand report of the sighting, and a person who was driving on the highway when the sighting happened of an actual landing of a ship on the highway, and suddenly out of nowhere bunch of big black SUVs came and surrounded it and cut off any traffic that was coming up behind it, and everyone was redirected.
Didn't they point their lights outward too so that people couldn't see because the lights were blinding?
They backed their vehicles up against it so that the lights from their headlights would blind everybody else and they couldn't tell what it was. Very, very smart and tactical.
Oh yeah, and again, I'm just going to say it here. This is part one of our Yucca Man exploration. Because like you can hear us talking about, there's so much more to the Yucca Man than just a simple creature sighting.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Yucca Man is a symptom of something far greater. And it still exists. I do think the Yucca Man could be real. But I think it's just part of something grander.
Right.
And we'll discuss in part two not only the history of the area, including some very interesting ties to Native American lore.
Oh, yes.
And the people who made this land possible.
Right.
But we'll also talk about the connection between UFO sightings in the area.
Right.
And even some hauntings and ghost stories at 29 Palms.
Right.
And Joshua Tree, which are very, in the same area that the Yucca Man has been sighted.
There's honestly been so many accounts.
Yeah.
It's really one of those things. It's just too hard to ignore when you have that much lore behind it. And when I say lore, I say it loosely because, there are a lot of documented eyewitness reports.
Yeah. So next week, make sure you tune in and subscribe to our podcast because we're going to discuss part two, the history of Yucca Man, the history of the area, and the Yucca Man's connection to ghosts, the paranormal, and UFOs.
And there's,
how they could all kind of be connected to one another.
Right.
And we'll explain why it lends credence to our theories.
Right.
That we presented here today.
Yeah, we're going to touch on all of that, and
we
again,
could be here for another couple hours if we got into it again. But
we definitely could, but we also want to let everyone know if between now and then you have your own personal stories to share of sightings. We're always looking to share like a little bit of a personal story from a listener. So feel free, even if it doesn't relate to this, it's something that we can share coming up, and we have a lot of paranormal topics that we cover.
Yeah.
So, don't be shy. Just let us know.
I want to thank everyone who's been so supportive on our podcast so far, and everyone on like Twitter and Instagram who has left comments or, retweeted our podcast or whatever. We want to thank you because, this podcast means a lot to us. We're really interested in this stuff, and, during this quarantine time, it's good to have an outlet, I think, for people like us. We're, what we call weirdos, but we like the weird. We love the paranormal. We love the stuff that a lot of other people just don't want to talk about.
Right, and we're glad that there's a forum for people with our interests, and like after we just participated in the Paracon.
Special shout out to Greg and Dana Newkirk.
Oh, yes.
I doubt they're listening, but if they do, I just want to thank you for putting on such a great virtual con. Like the Phenomicon was actually one of the best cons we've ever attended. Some great panels.
Great people involved.
For people like us, so we'll just say, being disabled myself, it was great to have the experience of a con in an online setting without the stress of, are we going to be able to get there?
Absolutely.
Are we going to be able to climb stairs to get to this one room for a panel? That kind of thing is always a worry of ours, being disabled.
It's a challenge for sure.
And what Greg and Dana put together here was really interactive. We talked to a lot of great people online. We saw some amazing panels from, people from Tyler Strand to John Tenney, the cast of Hellier, Amy Bruni. It was a great weekend.
Yeah, Alan Greenberg.
Alan Greenberg was a interesting and fun panel to listen to. But
I recommend to anybody who hasn't signed up for the museum that Greg and Dana run.
The traveling museum on Patreon.
Exactly. That, they're going to be hopefully doing more Paracons very soon.
Yeah, they're in the stages of planning Paracon or Phenomicon 2 right now. So, $15 a month is not that bad.
Exactly.
And especially during this time where we all we need a sense of community. I think what they've done here is great. And that's actually another reason why we feel so inspired to continue doing this podcast.
Right.
Like they're pioneering the virtual con for the paranormal community.
Right.
We want to provide a space for everyone who loves to talk about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Come talk to us. Direct message us on Twitter, comment on Twitter or Instagram. We're going to be posting all the time. We just put up a brand new post about your favorite paranormal equipment to use.
Right.
Let us know what kind of equipment you like to use when you're investigating the paranormal.
You have local cases or urban legends. I mean,
we'll talk about it all.
We're open to it. So, in the spirit of the fact that we were just talking about Hellier, I want to wrap up with something since I talk about sharing personal stories. If you've watched the show and about synchronicities, like we talked about earlier. Not long after watching the show for probably the second time, I guess.
Yeah.
We experienced, especially the second season, I should say, because if you've watched it, you know how it ends. So it seemed to open up for not just us, but for a lot of people, going through and experiencing their own synchronicities.
Synchronicity storm.
A storm, absolutely. And so this is just one that I just wanted to share. It's a very short one. But one day, when we remember the days when we used to still go out grocery shopping all the time?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day, I should say. We were going to the store, getting out of the car in the parking lot, and an older man is walking through on the way to his car, and he just stops in his tracks and comes up to me.
Yeah.
And he starts to tell me a story.
I'm sitting there unloading the groceries at the time, and I'm listening to the story like, what is happening?
It was very random, I will say, because, there was no interaction between us leading up to this, obviously.
We didn't see him in the store.
No, well, we hadn't gotten in yet. I think we were getting there. Oh, you were unloading. You're right. So, at any rate, he comes up and starts telling me a story about visiting the Arizona crater with a man named Mr. Bradley. And literally when I say this, it's like talking to no one and someone walks up, let me tell you about the time I went to visit the Arizona crater with Mr. Bradley.
We were in the middle of a conversation with this guy.
Exactly.
Like, wait, who are you?
Exactly. And then he says, if only you knew who I worked for. Like, this Mr. Bradley was very important, apparently. Yeah. And he says he's a very powerful man who has already gone from Earth and come back.
Yeah.
So,
quite a statement to make in the parking lot of a grocery store.
It was, and it was very random. It's not like I had a Area 51 sticker on my van.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just the synchronicity of having just finished season 2.
Yeah.
And several other things that happened as well. But this particular encounter was just, it struck me because of his comment. He'd already gone from Earth and come back.
Yeah.
And he's a very powerful man. And, this man, mind you, was well into his 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And so he was far beyond a working man's age, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
But he spoke of this as if, this had just recently happened. And he went to the Arizona crater for whatever reason with Mr. Bradley.
Yeah.
And that he is a very, very powerful man, not of this earth. So it was a very interesting interaction, I will say. And I think I commented at the time that Indrid Cold must be watching my feed and know that I watch Hellier because of this interesting encounter.
Or Terry Wrist. Or Terry Reese.
Or maybe he was Terry Wrist.
Or maybe.
We'll never know. But
he
was older. So, and he did look like he wore like an old army flak jacket. So.
I mean, this was at a time where after this we were also getting like people leaving comments that looked like they were part of the Thelemites and wizards.
Oh gosh, yes.
I mean, there's a lot of stories we could tell you, but like this was a weird synchronicity storm event.
I got warned from going to a labyrinth in the desert area out here by some unknown person who was a Thelemite and said that if I knew it was good for me, I shouldn't go there.
I mean, we're talking. I mean, this is again. We have so many episodes. We want to talk about a lot of different things.
Oh yeah.
in our local area, near where we live, there is a mysterious, what we call circular rock formation. It's a labyrinth.
Right.
And what's weird about it is that no one has officially come and claimed that they built it. And most of the time, when people build these things in areas, they claim it. They say, "Oh, this is a meditative spot,
Right.
a spiritual spot." No one has done that in our area, but there's a lot of disturbing disappearances,
Right.
Deaths,
In the area.
suspected murders. We've had a lot of people in spirit box sessions say that there is a cult in our area.
Right.
I mean, again, we're going to talk a lot about this in that specific episode, but there's a lot of weird stuff in this area, and so.
Well, it has a ritual altar. I mean, we can go on and on.
That's what that lady was warning, or the Thelemite person was warning us about.
Right.
Was to stay away from there, and it was like out of nowhere. It was a simple question of, has anyone been to this area?
Right. I was trying to figure out the best way to access it.
Yeah.
Because it was literally in the desert. And so I also run a missing persons podcast. And one of the missing people who did turn up dead, her remains were found very close to this rock formation. So,
and her car had disappeared in the same area about
4 years apart. So
4 years apart.
So yeah, it was just in researching, and that was the comment I got on my research, is to stay away if I knew it was good for me. So
that's what goes hand in hand with the paranormal. Though, is the things that people should be scared about are other people.
Exactly, that's so true.
Not typically, unless it's a rare occurrence. The paranormal, the UFOs, are not something we need to necessarily be scared of.
No, you're right.
It's something to approach cautiously, but with curiosity. But the people are the most dangerous, scary part of this profession.
Right.
So always have someone with you. Be partnered up with someone. Be prepared.
Right. Do your research before you go anywhere.
Yeah, don't just go blindly. Always do your research about the area, what you're getting into, and have the right people with you.
And don't go alone, Tyler Strand. But I'm just going to say that. So
enjoy your Bigfoot hunt this week, Tyler.
So again, Mr. Bradley, if you're out there, shout out to you if you want to tell us who you are and why you're so powerful. Hey, our ears are open, and thank you everyone to listening.
Our email is in the description, so feel free to send us a mysterious email.
We're going to get an email from Terry Russo, I just know it. So anyway, thank you guys, and we will be back for episode 3 very soon.
Yeah, we'll look forward to next week, hopefully, part 2 of our investigation, I guess you could call it, into the Yucca Man.
Exactly.
So thank you for listening this week. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know we went into a few different tangents, but this is what you can expect here, and thank you for your support so far.
Thank you.
It's meant the world to us, so.
And stay tuned.
Yeah, stay weird, everyone.
Definitely stay weird.
Shout out to Greg again on that one. But
All right.
Everyone have a good night.
Good night.